this week. Great. So that's the background of our program. Our executives have 10 to 12 plus years experience. They're pretty seasoned in their roles. And what we've learned over the last decade is that while the program was initially set up for individuals who are looking to advance their careers, over the past decade, more and more students want to switch careers, and not just small switches, but big switches. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And honestly, you're going to get these slides, so I'm going to go through pretty quickly because I want to make sure, I know it's getting close to the end of the day, and I want to make sure everybody gets to their designated happy hour or wherever you're going to spend the evening. But you will get the slides, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions after the presentation goes. And everything that I'm going to convey today is in the book, so you can also get the information there. Okay, so kicking off, I love my comics, so you'll see a couple of these throughout. I think this is the way a lot of our students focus on their job search. They figure they come to school and that it's all going to work out. Yet that's why we have jobs, because we kind of have to be that miracle in the slide that you're looking at, and students look to us to help them to figure out what they should do, and then once they figure that out, how they should get there. And so that's what I want to do today, is just give you a couple of exercises that Steve and I use with our current students, and just some background around how Switchers was created, particularly for this population, but honestly, it works for a lot of different populations, and how the job search is changing is going to require more of a switchers type job search than the traditional job search. So everything in here applies to students, whether they're looking to stay on a traditional trajectory or make a switch. So what are some of the career trends? Well, one of the most recent ones that I've heard is called the Great Resignation. And I don't know if anybody's heard that term yet, but the reason that economists are predicting that there's going to be a great resignation is because of two reasons. One, people have had time over the past year to reflect and recognize where they want to be. And two, people are wanting to stay remote, but they are not going to be able to do that in their current organization because their organization wants them back in the office. So for those two reasons, it is predicted that come fall, we are going to see people changing careers all over the place, changing companies, and it's going to look like the map that you see at the airport with the air traffic controllers with all the planes in the air. People are just going to be doing this massive move, which is really exciting, but at the same time, it creates a lot of work for people like us, because a lot of those career changes are going to be switches, which are more challenging than your traditional job search. So let me talk a little bit about things that are going on in the market. I know we covered some of this in our keynote yesterday, which is fantastic, but just what we're seeing in the State of the Union in the executive MBA, because I'm sure most, if not all of it, applies to all of the coaches on this call. So the market's changing rapidly and will continue. We know this. Hiring processes are broken and haven't caught up. I'm going to touch on that more. You'll see that's one of my soapboxes. Tuition's increasing and financial sponsorship for our students is decreasing. So fewer companies are paying for our EMBAs to come to the program, and they're paying out of pocket, which leads to rising expectations for career outcomes, which falls on the career department. And of course, there's generational differences in processing information. So our executives, while the average age is about 36, 38, they span from late 20s to up to 60s. So processing information and how people want information is very different. And just a couple of statistics that really blew my mind in studying some of this is that LinkedIn did a study and found that the top 10 jobs in demand in 2015 didn't exist 5 years prior. And when you think about a statistic like that, you realize how incredibly difficult it is for somebody to not only pick a job, but to identify what skills they have to do that job. Again, they look to us to do that, and they want a roadmap. And to the extent that we can give them that, we try. But the fact is, there is no very clear roadmap any longer. It's predicted that between 30 and 80% of all jobs that exist today will disappear over the next 10 to 20 years as they're replaced by automation and robots. Robots are going to be our new coworkers. And what we're finding is, Michelle Weiss wrote a great book, Long Life Learning. 44% of employers offer zero upskilling or reskilling. And a lot of the upskilling they do offer is around compliance training. So workplace violence, sexual harassment, HR policy type stuff. So people are inevitably going to be coming back to programs like we have here at Penn and Morton to upskill. And they're not doing this because it's of a, philosophical interest. They're doing this because the jobs are requiring it. Their jobs are going away, or their jobs are changing so much. And so they're expecting that they come to the program and that there's going to be a job waiting for them. We know that tenure in a job is getting shorter. We know that actually spending 10 years in a job can be a detriment in the market because you're not looked at as agile. We had an alumni from Google come in not too long ago to talk to our students, and they were really shocked because, again, even though our students are executives, what he said was that Google is struggling to hire, not because there aren't enough people with the requisite engineering degrees or programming degrees, but it's because that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for people who can come into the organization and kind of be entrepreneurial. So find their own team members who want to work with them, or find people who will buy into the project that they're doing and support them. And so you need to have these engineering skills or these programming skills, but you also need to have what I think for years have been called soft skills, the ability to collaborate, the ability to influence without authority, the ability to sell yourself and what you're doing. And so what we're learning is that it's not enough. We need these additional skills. And it was really interesting because McKinsey did a study where they found that the skills needed in the workplace jumped from 178 to 924 in just 3 years. And for those of you who help your students and look at the job descriptions they send, you probably have seen this. The job descriptions are more like dissertations these days. They just keep adding more bullets and more requirements. So the students are really, even if they're great at the job search or once were, they really are going to need our help in figuring out how to navigate all of this. This is one of my favorite quotes that you can see on the screen. We no longer need to be good at predicting the future. We now must succeed when the future is unpredictable. And I think that is exactly where we are right now. So when you know that hiring is about elimination, not selection, you craft an effective job search strategy. And honestly, this is the basis for the book Switchers. It creates, as much as you can, a roadmap to teach students about how to not get eliminated in the early stages of the job search through a lot of things that Steve talked about regarding the job search action groups, how to rebrand, how to build ambassadors through your network, how to create a version of yourself that aligns with what the hiring manager wants. So I'm going to talk a little bit about career psychology, because as a psychologist, I think this is an often ignored part of the job search. And it is so important, because what we know is that whenever there's a human interaction like there is in hiring, there is psychology. So I'm going to ask you to do a quick exercise, and it's just going to take 10 seconds. So here's the exercise. I want you to, wherever you're sitting, I want you to take 10 seconds to look at everything in the room that you're in that's red, and remember it. Look at everything in the room you're in that's red for 10 seconds. Okay, got it? Now I want you to close your eyes and remember everything in your room that's green. Now, I'm not going to test you on this, but if you actually did follow along with the exercise, you know that that is very hard to do. But the reason I love that exercise is because that's exactly how hiring managers look at the hiring process. They look at it as a matching game, and they look at it as a process where, you know, if you have X number of years of this, then clearly you can do that. When we know it's certainly not that simple, and that's certainly not true. So I'm going to go through 6 what I call job switch killers in the book, but I'll call them career switch killers here. And these are things that I'm certain you experience with your students, because I know Steve and I experienced them with ours. And these are the things that really are covered in the book Switchers to help students or people at any level of their career manage the job search. So first career switch killer we know is that people have limited experience in conducting a job search in the current market. So I want to talk about that, the hiring manager, for just a second, because we often don't focus on the hiring manager psychology. But what we know is that if you think about it, many hiring managers are not trained in hiring. And I always ask all of my executives this: how many of you have hired? Almost everyone raises their hand. How many of you have actually experienced 8 hours of training in hiring? Almost no one raises their hand. So there's not a lot of training going on in this area. And you know, as somebody who has been in recruiting, I've received weeks of training in this. And it's really scary to think that there's people out there making these decisions who really haven't thought through how to do this in a structured or consistent way. So we know this. We know the hiring process is biased. We know it's illogical. We know it doesn't make a lot of sense from the candidate standpoint. But we also know that hiring managers actually hate hiring. And if you think about it, if you've ever hired, you probably had to take time away from your day job. You probably had to spend extra time in the evening going through resumes. You had to make phone calls. It's a time-intensive process. And when you're dealing with a time-intensive process, you know, you want to get it over with as soon as you can. And so you have these combining factors. I want to get this over with as soon as I can. I hate doing this. I don't really know what I'm doing. And so you tend to make decisions based on gut decisions. And the psychological term I use for this, this is not my term, by the way, is loss aversion. Humans are very good about using loss aversion as a strategy to make decisions, which means that we will essentially go with the less risky decision. So loss aversion has to do with, we place more weight on losses than we do on gains. And so hiring managers are no different. They are humans and they make decisions the same way. We know that a poor hiring decision can not only cost a lot of money, but we know that it can also be embarrassing if your direct report doesn't work out. So this idea of loss aversion is what ultimately makes somebody pick someone. And chances are you're not going to pick a switcher because the switcher is more risky. So you tend to go with the traditional candidate, even if they're not the strongest candidate. So this is a hurdle that job seekers, especially switchers, need to get over. And that's why I say you have to look at the job search as elimination versus selection, because the brain works very differently when you're talking about elimination than it does when you're talking about selection. And you all know this because we know that it's important for somebody to match first, stand out second, because if you don't match first, you're not even going to get that conversation with the hiring manager. So we know that you have to think about what's going to get me eliminated and how do I remove that. So for example, I had a student who was a PhD in chemistry, very, very bright woman, came to the MBA program, built a lot of business skills, and was on the pharma wanting to move from the clinical side to the business side, but she kept leading with her PhD. And the business side is thinking, we don't need a PhD, we need somebody with business skills. So while difficult, once she removed that PhD from her resume and her profile and stopped introducing herself that way, she started to get more doors open, and she started to introduce herself in a way that really aligned with the needs of the business side. And the cool part about it is that after she got those interviews, because remember that first part is about elimination. I have 250 resumes. I have to eliminate it to 10 people to phone screen. I have to eliminate that to 5 to interview. And then I have to eliminate that to 1 to hire. Of course, in the top 5, they asked her, why should we hire you? And her response was, well, I actually bring these additional skills because I have a PhD in chemistry. So this idea of match first, stand out second is a hallmark of the book because of this idea of loss aversion and getting through the process. So I go into way more depth of that in the book, but to me, that is one of the key parts of the hiring process that students need to understand, especially if they're a switcher. We were talking about this earlier on a session, hazy or dual job search target. Yeah, what the heck do you want to do when there's so many options, right? Jobs that didn't exist a few years ago. I mean, think about it. The whole cannabis industry didn't exist a few years ago in the US. So how do you narrow it down? And I think students struggle with this because of the plethora of opportunities. And the other reason is because they've been given some bad advice. They've been told, follow your passion, when the fact is we have so many passions because humans are diverse and complex and we're interested in a lot of things. So in a lot of ways, I think students need to try things so that they can narrow down their, what I call plan A, you might call it a target, but you need to get to a point where you can succinctly explain to somebody what you want, why you're good at it, and have them understand so they can be an ambassador for it. And sometimes it takes some iterations to go through. So we look at it from 3 ways: skills, interests, and the market. And a lot of students skip the market piece, and that can be pretty detrimental to their search because our students want to make major pivots. And for example, if you want to go from being in tech to being in private equity, you need to know that that's an incredibly competitive market. It's a market that's very relational in nature, so very network based. And it's a market that tends to favor traditional backgrounds. And so it can take a really long time to make that switch. So understanding that market piece is something that we really push. And you're going to get all these slides, so I'm not even going to go through this, but this is an exercise we use to help people network for discovery. And we believe clarity comes through action, through having those discussions, through asking those questions to different people, finding the themes and patterns. And so obviously we use many, many things, but this is just one of them. And happy if it's something you want, that you can adapt it to your students. Another career switch killer, the desire for quick post-degree results. So yes, I got my degree. I should have my job by the time I walk across the stage. And in the MBA program, we don't have internships because our students are working full time. So if your program does have internships or other practical experiences, then this might be a great way for students to catapult into a job. But our students really don't need to get a job the day they graduate because they've just spent 2 years getting a degree. They have a full-time job, and it's to their benefit to apply those skills in their current workspace before making a pivot. But they want it now, and they want it just exactly like they had envisioned. So we try and tell people that their MBA does not expire, but they really think it does. So one of the things that we found very helpful is helping students understand the degree of difficulty in the switch they're trying to make so that they can have some more realistic expectations set around it. Now, 20 years ago, when people were being very straightforward about coming to the program to make advancement moves or promotions, it was kind of a matching thing, like that old game memory that we used to play. You have a traditional background, you're making a traditional switch. That can be relatively straightforward and relatively simple in light of all the different switches that you could make. So when you look at this graphic, if you think about making an industry switch, so you're doing the same function, but you're looking to change industries, then that's going to be slightly more challenging. And so we need to build a career search strategy that takes that into account and use the strengths you have. So we use the strengths of your function to help with that switch. If you're looking to make a functional switch, so perhaps you're in recruiting and you want to be in marketing and not an industry switch, so you're in CPG and you want to stay in CPG, then this is slightly more challenging, because while you can certainly use the industry experience and context to pivot, the functional piece will be a risk for a hiring manager. So you have to have a different strategy and it might take longer. And then, of course, the most challenging is the double switch. We deal with this a lot. We have people moving from military into civilian roles. We have, as I mentioned earlier, people who want to move from technology in a startup to private equity in a huge bank. And if they understand that the further you stray from your traditional path, the more effort and sacrifice your job search might take, that's going to be an important part of their strategy, particularly that sacrifice part, which is really what I want to focus on next, because a lot of students kind of forget about that until they're starting out on their switch. So back to this loss aversion. So the psychology of the hiring manager is one thing. The psychology of the job seeker is another thing. Job seekers, especially our students who are executives, are very, very ingrained in the identity of who they are as a successful director or VP. And shedding that identity to rebrand is very difficult. But as I said, if you don't match first, you're never going to get the opportunity to stand out second. So really thinking through how hard it can be for somebody, especially coming to an Ivy League school who has had impressive accomplishments that have gotten them here, to shed that, to be more vulnerable, to take on a job where you may not have as much experience, is a very hard thing. And they want to grasp, they want to say, I'm a lawyer, but I want to do this, or I'm a, as we talked about before, a PhD, but I want to do this. And you can't, because short attention spans in the hiring process. So you need to understand that if you don't match first, then you're done. So this idea of loss aversion comes into it when we tell our students, hey, you know, if you want to go into consulting, you're going to have to travel a lot. And I'll just give you one quick example. I had a student who had a doctorate in architectural engineering, extremely successful, and came to Wharton and got caught up in the buzz of wanting to join, you know, MBB and be a strategy consultant and leapfrog into other areas, and was really excited about this. So I said, okay, let's sit down and talk about a strategy. It's a double switch. Let's talk about what some of those things are that you might need to consider. And of course, he would have to travel. And traveling, oops, I don't get there yet. Traveling was not something he wanted to do because he had young children. He would have to take a pay cut because he was very well off in the field he had chosen because he was high up. He didn't want to take a pay cut, you know, and there were other things that started to come out that he wasn't really jazzed about. So this is initial excitement kind of wore off when he realized that he could get on the path he wanted, but he would have to make some sacrifices. And so one of the things that is in the book that I use is something called the Job Switch Tolerance Questionnaire. And it's short, it's 12 questions. It asks, and again, you're going to get this, it asks you how much change you're willing to tolerate in your current situation. And if you're not willing to give up the corner office, or you're not willing to give up, you know, some of the things that you have where you are now, chances are your switch is going to be very, very difficult. So I think this is a really helpful tool for people to level set where they are and how they might get in their own way if they don't think about these things. Now, you know, add things like relocation and other hurdles, and it's going to be even harder. So my advice to students isn't, you can't do this, but you have to be the one to decide what you're willing to trade off for it. And if you're not willing to trade some things off for it, it's going to be very difficult. Now, making a switch in one felt swoop isn't the only option. We also have what we call stepping stone switches, or some people might call them bridge jobs. But we certainly have coached students to work through the process by taking a stepping stone. So I had a student who was an attorney. She wanted to be in HR in a startup, and she was in a large corporation. So she actually took her skill set, moved into more of an HR role within her organization, did that for 2 years. And then after she had that experience, she took that to move into HR in a startup. So it took her 2 years to get there, but she sacrificed less because she did it in a stepping stone type way. So different ways to get from point A to point B, but I think students need to go into it with their eyes open. Believing a hirer cares about coursework. Now, this may vary depending on, again, your program, but as executives, our students are not finding that hiring managers really care that they took a class in private equity or international finance. They want to know that they have applied experience. And if you don't have applied experience, they don't want to talk to you. And again, since we don't do internships, how are you supposed to deal with that? But again, going back to the psychology of why does this matter? It matters because hiring managers are human, and humans are biased, and humans have loss aversion, like we talked about. So just to go back to this role of bias and loss aversion, every decision we make as a human is filtered through our emotional center. Everything from what are you going to have for dinner tonight to, what color shirt do you want to buy? And so because of this, that's why the need to brand is so strong, because brands are what really tap into emotions. And so again, I'm not going to go into the brain science of this very deeply. I just kind of wanted to put it out there, but there's a lot of great research on how even things like likability. Amy Cuddy did a lot of research on the fact that likability trumps competence when it comes to making decisions about someone, because hey, I need to know I like you and trust you before I care about your experience. In the VC world, the entrepreneurs who tended to get backed were ones who were deemed more likable. Neuroscientists found that your brain gets more pleasure from talking about yourself than it does from food or money. So this is a key quality, and one that really does come through in a personal brand. So while it's important to be genuine, you also have to think about matching and likability. So again, really quick exercise that we do is who am I map, because we want people to feel like they're being genuine, but we also want people to see themselves holistically. So this is my who am I map. Again, you don't need to read it, you'll get the slides, but really quickly, this is all of my experiences, accomplishments, training, titles I've had, volunteer work I've done, everything. It's not just job stuff. And once you can really spend some time mapping it out on a piece of paper, you can start to see yourself in different ways by grouping what you've done. So for example, hopefully you can see those circles. But if I wanted to go back into clinical work, I have a series of skills that will help me do that. And those are the skills that are circled in red. As a career coach, I have other skills that would be more appealing to a hiring manager, and those are the ones in green. If I wanted to perhaps pursue a career in media, I have a number of skills that would fit in that respect. And those would be what I would put on my LinkedIn profile and talk about in an interview. So my goal of this exercise is to help people genuinely see themselves in different ways so that they feel confident about talking to a hiring manager about what they bring to the table. And this really causes you to strip out your titles or your company names and look at yourself as an individual branded by a series of experiences in certain areas. So there is a who am I map here for your students if they find that helpful. or feel free to adapt it. But I do find that when students go through this exercise, they start to see themselves in different ways, and they get really excited that they're not just their current title, but that they are these complex humans with all of these different skills. Job switch killer, underestimating the need to rebrand. So that's really what we've been talking about. If you don't rebrand, a hiring manager isn't going to see you as the solution to his or her problem. And so what we try and tell students is that people can do similar work and have different brands. And I know Steve's looking at this slide and telling me I'm dating myself, and many people don't remember who these individuals, well, Oprah has still been in the news, but obviously Oprah and Jerry Springer were talk show hosts, but they had a very different audience. They had a very different brand about them. And, you know, it's not enough to just talk about your general industry or your general field, because emotions are playing such a big role. You really have to brand yourself to the company culture, to the team you're joining, to the way you do work. And if you read what I have on the screen right now as a general profile statement, you'll probably notice something pretty striking. It basically applies to every single person on this call. Sounds good, has some good buzzwords, things that probably show up in job descriptions even, but this doesn't tell me anything about you as an individual. And this is what a lot of our students are doing. They're kind of saying, but I have all these things. I'm results driven, I'm strategic. It's like, yeah, but that's not a brand. Those are just some buzzwords that you're using that don't really appeal to anyone. So this is often what I see as a first step in the job switch process, is people kind of strip down everything so they look like a fit for where they're going, because they're so neutral. But that's not enough. That's step one, but you got to get to that point where you're branded to where you want to go, because we know brand, whether you're working or in a job search or having your own business, it really impacts the roles you get, the teams you're asked to participate on, the clients you get to work with, how much you get paid. And it's communicated in a lot of ways, how we show up, how we are on social media, our appearance, so many different ways. So I think it's such a critical topic to really help students understand. So apparently Steve said the Jerry Springer show is on in 20 minutes on the CW. So if you don't know who Jerry Springer is, I think you can live with that and skip that show, personally. So basic marketing slogan: if you appeal to everyone, you appeal to no one. And this is the strategy that our students like to take. They like to put everything they've done on their resume or in their profile, saying, well, the hiring manager is going to see all of this great stuff, and they're going to realize I can do all these wonderful things, and they're going to place me where it makes the most sense. And we all know on this call that no, and no, that's not going to happen. They're not going to see a match. They're going to see someone who's a generalist, or they're just going to look at your resume and say, this makes no sense to me, and move on. So one of the things that we coach students to do is stop introducing themselves by their title or their company, and start introducing themselves by the brand that they bring to the market, by the experience and the value. So if I say I'm a career coach at Wharton, people are going to, I give the power away for somebody to interpret what that means. And some people will think it's a recruiter. Some people will hear Wharton and think it's something to do with finance. But if I really modify that, and I say, well, what I do is, have you ever been in a job search? Most people will say yes. Well, I help people take their resume and their background and their LinkedIn profile and really market or target it towards the industry that they want to be in, and rebrand themselves so that a hiring manager will see them as a good fit. And I do that as a career coach in the executive program at the Wharton School. Now I'm being a little bit more clear. I'm not giving my power away for somebody else to interpret. And I'm hopefully creating an ambassador because there's a connection there. Somebody's going to say, yeah, I've been in a job search and I keep getting overlooked because they're seeing my PhD and not my business experience. And so you start to build a relationship. So this is something that we really focus on with students because we want them to see themselves as multidimensional so that they can use those different dimensions to market themselves to the careers in different areas. The reason I love this picture, and I'll give you a second to take a look at it, is because there are actually 3 faces in here. Most people see 2, but there are actually 3. So I don't know if you want to type in the chat box. Can you see all 3? Does anyone see all 3? So looks like people are seeing them. So there's a young woman, an older woman, and a gentleman with a mustache. And the reason I love this picture is because depending on what perspective you're looking at it from, all 3 of those things are very real and in the picture, but it's a great analogy to what brand, because a lot of people say, oh, brand feels very inauthentic and I don't feel like it's me. But it's really just about putting different parts of you forward. And if you describe it in terms of a product, so for example, a car, and let's just say there's a car, a vehicle you're selling, and it has a great sound system and leather seats, and it also has a lot of safety features like airbags and child locks and everything like that. You're going to pick and choose what you present to the customer based on their needs. So if you get a young family coming in, you're not going to talk about the V6 engine and the killer sound system and leather seats. You're going to talk about the 20 airbags and the child-proof locks and the ability to to run flat tires, whatever those things are. It's the same car, but it's really about what you highlight. And this is what we try and instill in students. We're so multidimensional, and it is genuine if you understand your audience and you pick and choose those aspects that are going to be most appealing to them. That's really what this is about. It's not about being who you're not. It's just about being intentional about understanding your audience and what is going to resonate most with them. The last one is resistance to networking. I'm not even going to talk about this in depth because I know every single person on this call is experiencing this with students, that they just hate networking. They're not good at it. They're introvert. I'm an introvert. I know no one believes me when I say that, but it's really easy to sit behind a screen and talk on any topic, but I am an introvert. I'm not a natural networker. It's not exciting for me to walk into a room full of strangers in the evening. I'd rather be home with a book. So all of these excuses we've all heard 1,000 times. And we all know that networking is important. We all know that it's critical for people to build a network in order to gain access to opportunities. And we talk less about like building a network and more about creating ambassadors. And ambassadors are people who have 2 qualities. And this is what makes somebody an ambassador. 1, they're willing to spend their social capital on you. So you have some type of relationship with them, and they're willing to give you a referral. They're willing to make an introduction. They're willing to, maybe give you a testimonial or something like that, pass your resume on. The other part is that they know what you do. They know your plan A, they know your brand. And that's the harder part, because we don't often talk about those things. And I often challenge people, think about people people you spend a lot of time with. Are you talking about what you do? And I'm not saying, oh, I work at Penn, or, oh, I'm a coach, but I'm saying, do you talk about your goal for the year and how somebody might be able to help you with that? Because often it's the people who are closest to us, who want to see us succeed, who are our cheerleaders, that really have no idea how to help us. And so I would say that's a core thing I talk about with people who say, I hate networking and I'm not good at it. I say, well, let's start with the people you already know, the people you've already built relationships with. Do they know what your goal is for 2021? Have you asked them for help and introductions to the companies you're looking at? Have you talked to them about your job search? And usually the answer is no, 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 because they're in a different industry or they don't really understand. It's like, well, help them understand. Give them a way to help you, because I often find that if your network isn't helping you, it's less about the fact that they don't want to help you or they can't help you, but more likely you're not giving them enough information to help you. So that's what you have to kind of get to. So in terms of our students, we have a lot of strategies that we use to help them with networking. I just wanted to present you with one because we find our students love, love, love templates and structure. So this is what I call a glide question. And here's what a glide question is. It really helps you build insightful questions for informational interviews that get you information that you need, leads to an interesting conversation. So those people who say, oh, I have nothing interesting to say, is something that your contact is uniquely knowledgeable about, which I think is super important, demonstrates that you've got skills in market industry knowledge, and shows some expertise. So here's an example of what a glide question might be. I noticed on LinkedIn that you're involved with the new product launch in China. That's something that interests me, having spent a year in Shanghai as an expat with my previous company, helping to open our distribution center. Can you tell me more about your role and how the recent legislation has impacted the project? Fantastic question. It's chock full of good information about you, the networker, shows that you've done your research. And so we usually coach students to say, hey, come up with 2 of these for a 15 to 20 minute networking or informational meeting, and you'll get more bang for your buck. So again, just one of many tools that we use with students, but we find that one of the key barriers to networking is having those scripts or those tools or those resources to help people kind of get there. So as I wrap up, I'm just going to say that career switchers tend not to give up because they lack the skills, but because they don't have the proper search strategies. And what we know is that the job search is changing. The market is changing. We know that people are going to need more skills than they needed previously, and that some of the skills that they had before aren't going to translate into the new market. But we also know, and this is a sad reality, that hiring hasn't quite caught up yet. Hiring systems don't really know how to hire switchers. And as companies are realizing that their job needs are changing, and that unfortunately with new jobs, you can't find somebody with a traditional background, I'm really hoping that these processes will shift so that switchers will be considered more and more. Because if you ask any hiring manager, what are some of the key qualities you need? You need somebody who can shift and change with the business. So the fact that somebody has been a switcher in the past and is willing to switch is actually a very good quality to hire for, but we just haven't figured out a way to do it in scale yet. And that's kind of my personal mission to kind of move in that direction. But I will stop there because I know we only have 3 more minutes. And as a reminder, happy to share these slides. And I think this was recorded, so you'll get that as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Dawn. That was excellent.
Great. Any questions, or everyone running off to watch Jerry Springer? Please, I hope not.
I asked a question.
Oh, you did? I didn't see it. Sorry.
But you hear questions from me all the time, so you probably just ignored it.
I would never do that on purpose. Characteristics of students who succeed in switching: they are realistic, they are go-getters, they recognize that traditional strategies don't work, so they don't hang out online. They are creative, they do things that what everyone else is doing in the job search, they do the opposite. They're fantastic networkers. And I'm not saying that they're just naturally charismatic. What I mean is that they set a goal for networking each week and they hit it. And they get rejected a lot, just like all of us. They hear no a lot, they get turned down a lot, but they keep going and they have a mindset of, I'm going to make this happen. And that's what makes somebody a successful switcher. And there's actually a section of the book that talks about those characteristics or traits that make somebody successful from a personality characteristic as well. So good question.